For decades, BET stood as the most powerful Black-owned media company in America, transforming music, television, and culture while generating billions of dollars in value. But behind the success, the family that built the empire faced heartbreaking losses, difficult decisions, and controversies that few people talk about. From humble beginnings to one of the biggest media deals in history, this is the remarkable and tragic story behind BET's billion-dollar Black media empire. So, how did a family change television forever, and what did it cost them along the way? Number 1. The opportunity everyone else missed. Before BET became a billion-dollar media empire, before it helped launch careers and shape popular culture, it was simply an idea in the mind of a man who believed an entire audience was being ignored. To understand how BET came to exist, you have to start with the story of its co-founder, Robert Johnson. His journey wasn't one of instant success or inherited wealth. In fact, it began in circumstances that were about as far removed from a media empire as possible. Robert Johnson was born in Mississippi during a period when opportunities for Black Americans were severely limited. Growing up in the segregated South, he witnessed firsthand the barriers that stood between many Black families and economic success. Yet even as a young boy, Johnson developed a belief that education and determination could open doors that society often tried to keep shut. His parents placed a strong emphasis on learning, and that commitment would prove to be one of the most important influences in his life. Johnson excelled academically and eventually earned opportunities that allowed him to pursue higher education. He attended college, continued his studies, and began building a career that seemed headed toward law and public affairs rather than television. By the 1970s, Johnson had gained experience working in government and corporate communications. On paper, he was doing well. He had a stable career, valuable connections, and a respectable future ahead of him. But there was one thing he couldn't ignore. Everywhere he looked, television was growing into one of the most powerful industries in America. Cable television was expanding rapidly, new channels were appearing, and media companies were discovering that specialized programming could attract loyal audiences. Yet despite the growing number of channels, one audience remained dramatically underserved: Black Americans. At the time, Black viewers appeared on television far less frequently than their share of the population would suggest. Programs specifically created for Black audiences were limited, and many networks seemed unwilling to invest seriously in content that reflected Black culture, entertainment, and experiences. Johnson saw what many executives failed to see. He recognized that millions of viewers represented not just a cultural community but also a massive market opportunity. While others focused on what already existed, Johnson focused on what was missing. That realization would eventually become the foundation of BET. Of course, identifying an opportunity is one thing. Building a company around it is something entirely different. Johnson knew that launching a television network would require money, connections, and credibility. None of those would come easily. Fortunately, he wasn't pursuing the dream alone. His wife, Sheila Johnson, would become an essential partner in the venture. While Robert often received much of the public attention, Sheila played a critical role behind the scenes. Together, they shared a vision of creating a media platform that spoke directly to Black audiences. The challenge was convincing investors that such a platform could actually succeed. Many potential backers were skeptical. Some questioned whether advertisers would support a network focused on Black viewers. Others doubted that enough people would watch. In an industry dominated by established players, the idea of a Black-focused cable channel seemed risky to many investors. But Johnson remained persistent. He pitched the concept repeatedly, refining his arguments and searching for anyone willing to take a chance on the idea. Eventually, he secured crucial support that allowed the dream to move forward. In 1980, Black entertainment television officially launched. Calling it a network in those early days might make it sound larger than it really was. The reality was far more modest. BET initially aired only a few hours of programming each week. Resources were limited. Budgets were tight. The company operated with far fewer advantages than its larger competitors. Every dollar mattered. Every decision mattered. And perhaps most importantly, every viewer mattered. The network relied heavily on music programming because producing original content was expensive. Music videos provided a cost-effective way to attract audiences while helping establish BET's identity. Slowly but surely, viewers began paying attention. For many Black households, BET offered something they rarely found elsewhere on television: representation. It wasn't just about entertainment. It was about seeing familiar faces, hearing familiar voices, and experiencing content that reflected communities often overlooked by mainstream media. Still, success was far from guaranteed. The early years were filled with uncertainty. Advertising revenue remained a challenge. Competition continued to grow. Some industry observers questioned whether the network could survive long enough to become profitable. There were moments when the future of the company seemed anything but secure. Yet Johnson continued pushing forward. He understood that building something truly groundbreaking required patience. Rather than chasing short-term victories, he focused on establishing a foundation that could support long-term growth. That strategy began paying off. As cable television expanded across America, BET gained access to more homes. Increased distribution brought larger audiences. Larger audiences attracted more advertisers. More advertising revenue allowed the company to invest in additional programming. The cycle of growth had finally begun. What started as a bold idea was slowly transforming into a legitimate media business. And perhaps more importantly, it was proving that Black audiences represented a powerful force in the marketplace. The success of BET challenged assumptions that had existed within the television industry for decades. It demonstrated that programming created for Black viewers could attract loyal audiences and generate substantial profits. But while the network was gaining momentum, the Johnsons were about to face a completely different challenge. Building a channel was one thing. Turning it into the most influential Black-owned media company in America would require an entirely new level of ambition. And as BET entered its next phase, the small startup that many had doubted was about to become a cultural phenomenon. But how did a modest cable experiment transform into a media empire that would change Black entertainment forever? That's where the story gets even more remarkable. Number 2. Building Black media's biggest empire. By the mid-1980s, it was becoming increasingly clear that BET was more than just a niche television channel. What had started as a risky experiment was evolving into something far larger: a cultural institution. While many traditional media executives had underestimated the power of Black audiences, Robert and Sheila Johnson were beginning to prove that serving an overlooked market wasn't just socially important, it was also good business. As cable television expanded across the United States, BET expanded with it. More households gained access to the channel every year. Viewers who had once struggled to find programming that reflected their culture suddenly had a network that seemed designed specifically for them. For many families, BET wasn't just another station on the cable lineup. It became part of daily life. The timing couldn't have been better. The 1980s and 1990s witnessed an explosion in Black music, sports, entertainment, and culture. Hip-hop was emerging from local communities and rapidly becoming a global force. R&B artists were dominating charts. Black actors, comedians, athletes, and entrepreneurs were reaching new levels of visibility. BET found itself at the center of this cultural wave. Unlike many mainstream networks, BET wasn't treating Black culture as an occasional feature. It was the focus. Viewers responded enthusiastically. Music programming quickly became one of the channel's strongest assets. At a time when music videos played a crucial role in promoting artists, BET provided exposure that many Black musicians couldn't always find elsewhere. For countless performers, appearing on BET represented a major career opportunity. The network helped introduce audiences to emerging stars, showcase established talent, and celebrate music that wasn't always receiving equal attention on other channels. As its popularity grew, BET expanded beyond music. The channel introduced news programs, public affairs discussions, entertainment shows, and special events aimed at serving different segments of its audience. This diversification helped transform BET from a simple music video outlet into a comprehensive media platform. One of the network's greatest strengths was its ability to create a sense of community. Viewers didn't simply watch BET, they identified with it. The channel became a shared cultural space where audiences could celebrate achievements, discuss issues affecting Black communities, and see themselves reflected on screen in ways that were often missing from mainstream television. Behind the scenes, however, building a media empire required far more than cultural relevance. It required relentless business discipline. Robert Johnson wasn't just a visionary, he was an aggressive strategist. He understood that influence without profitability would eventually collapse. To ensure BET's survival, he focused heavily on expanding distribution agreements, attracting advertisers, and strengthening the network's financial position. These efforts paid off. As audience numbers increased, advertisers began taking notice. Companies that had once overlooked Black consumers started recognizing their enormous purchasing power. BET became a valuable gateway to millions of viewers, making the network increasingly attractive to major brands. Revenue grew, the company's profile grew, and the Johnsons' ambitions grew right alongside it. While Robert often became the public face of the business, Sheila Johnson played an equally important role in helping the company succeed. She contributed to strategic planning, corporate development, and the countless behind-the-scenes responsibilities that accompany a growing enterprise. Building a company from the ground up demands sacrifices that outsiders rarely see. There are long hours, constant pressure, financial uncertainty, and personal compromises. The Johnsons were navigating all of those challenges while simultaneously trying to expand a network that was growing larger every year. By the 1990s, BET was becoming a powerhouse. The network's influence stretched far beyond television screens. Artists wanted exposure on BET, advertisers wanted access to BET's audience, politicians wanted interviews on BET. Major corporations wanted partnerships with BET. The network had become one of the most influential voices in Black media. Perhaps no event symbolized that influence more than the creation of the BET Awards and other high-profile programming initiatives that celebrated Black excellence in entertainment, sports, and culture. The channel wasn't merely reporting on culture anymore, it was helping shape it. For millions of viewers, BET became a trusted source of entertainment and representation. The network created opportunities for hosts, journalists, producers, executives, and creatives who might otherwise have struggled to find similar opportunities within mainstream media organizations. In many ways, BET became proof that ownership matters. For decades, Black audiences had contributed billions of dollars to the entertainment industry while having limited control over the institutions that shaped cultural narratives. BET represented something different. It was one of the most visible examples of a major Black-owned media company succeeding at the highest level. That success earned Robert Johnson increasing recognition throughout the business world. He was no longer simply a television executive. He had become one of the most prominent Black entrepreneurs in America. Business magazines profiled him. Industry leaders sought his advice. Aspiring entrepreneurs viewed him as an inspiration. From the outside, the story seemed almost perfect. A visionary founder identifies an overlooked opportunity. A determined couple builds a company from scratch. The company becomes a billion-dollar success. The American dream realized. But as is often the case, appearances can be deceiving. The pressure that comes with building an empire can be immense. Success creates expectations. Growth creates stress. And the very qualities that help entrepreneurs build extraordinary businesses can sometimes create challenges within their personal lives. As BET's influence expanded, the demands placed on the Johnson family increased as well. The company required constant attention. Major decisions carried enormous consequences. The stakes grew higher with every passing year. To the public, Robert and Sheila Johnson appeared to be one of the most successful power couples in America, a husband and wife team who had built a historic enterprise together. They attended high-profile events. They appeared in business publications. They represented a remarkable example of Black excellence and entrepreneurship. Yet behind the scenes, the pressures of success were beginning to take a toll. The empire was thriving. The brand was stronger than ever. The money was flowing. But the foundation that helped create it was beginning to crack. And before long, one of the most celebrated partnerships in Black business history would face a crisis that threatened to change everything. Because while BET was reaching the height of its power, the Johnson family's personal story was heading toward its most painful chapter yet. Number 3. The billion-dollar family breakdown. By the time BET had cemented itself as a dominant force in American media, the Johnson family had already achieved what many entrepreneurs only dream of. They had built a recognizable brand, scaled it into a national platform, and turned it into a billion-dollar enterprise that shaped culture across generations. But behind the polished image of success, the personal relationship at the center of it all was beginning to unravel. Robert Johnson and Sheila Johnson were not just business partners, they were a married couple who had built something extraordinary together. That shared history made the cracks forming in their relationship even more complicated, because their marriage and their business were deeply intertwined. As BET grew larger, so did the pressure surrounding it. The demands of running a national network are relentless. Meetings stretch late into the night, decisions carry financial consequences in the millions, and the responsibility of maintaining growth never truly stops. For the Johnsons, this meant that business was no longer something they could simply leave at the office. It followed them everywhere. Over time, that constant pressure began to affect their personal lives. Conversations that once focused on shared dreams and long-term vision gradually shifted towards strategy, conflict, and disagreement. The same ambition that built BET was now creating distance between the two people who started it. Sheila Johnson, who had been deeply involved in the company's rise, increasingly found herself navigating a shifting dynamic within both the business and the marriage. As BET expanded, corporate structures grew more complex, and decision-making became more centralized around Robert's leadership. What had once been a partnership in every sense slowly began to change. At the same time, Robert Johnson was operating under enormous pressure to maintain BET's momentum in a highly competitive industry. Every expansion, every negotiation, and every strategic move carried weight. In that environment, difficult decisions often had to be made quickly and not always collaboratively. The tension between business demands and personal connection continued to build. Eventually, the strain reached a breaking point. Robert and Sheila Johnson decided to divorce. But this was not an ordinary separation. It was a deeply public and financially significant split that immediately attracted national attention. Few business couples in America had built something as valuable as BET together, and even fewer had to untangle both their marriage and their shared ownership of a billion-dollar company at the same time. The divorce proceedings became one of the most closely watched business breakups in American corporate history. At the center of it all was BET itself. Because this wasn't just about ending a marriage, it was about dividing an empire. Sheila Johnson's role in the company's success could not be ignored. She had contributed significantly to BET's growth and development, and as the divorce unfolded, her stake in the business became a major point of negotiation. The settlement that followed was historic. Sheila Johnson ultimately walked away with a substantial financial payout and a share of the company's value, making her one of the most financially successful women in business at the time. But beyond the numbers, the emotional weight of the separation was profound. What had once been a shared dream had now become a divided legacy. For Robert Johnson, the divorce marked a turning point not only in his personal life, but also in his relationship with BET. The company he had co-founded with his wife was now operating under entirely different personal circumstances, and while BET continued to grow, the internal structure of ownership and leadership had fundamentally changed. The public watched closely as the story unfolded. To many, it was a reminder that even the most successful partnerships can fracture under pressure. Behind the glamour of billion-dollar success stories are real people dealing with real consequences. The Johnson divorce also sparked broader conversations about wealth, ownership, and recognition in the entertainment industry. Sheila Johnson's exit from BET did not diminish her contributions, but it highlighted how often the roles of women in business partnerships were underappreciated or overlooked in public narratives. Still, both Robert and Sheila moved forward in different directions. Sheila went on to pursue new ventures and eventually became one of the most influential women in business and sports ownership. Robert Johnson, meanwhile, continued to lead BET as it reached new financial heights. But the emotional and structural impact of their separation remained part of the company's story. Because even though BET was still growing, the foundation it was built on had changed forever. The partnership that helped create one of the most powerful Black-owned media companies in history was gone. And in its place was a new reality, one where success came at a deeply personal cost, yet the biggest shift was still to come. Because not long after the divorce fallout settled, Robert Johnson would make a decision that would change the future of BET forever and reshape how history remembers the empire they built together. Number 4. From historic sale to lasting legacy. After years of explosive growth, cultural influence, and dominance in Black entertainment, BET stood at a crossroads that would define its future forever. What began as a bold idea in cable television had become a billion-dollar institution, shaping music, culture, and media representation across the United States. But behind the success, a major shift was coming, one that would permanently alter the identity of the network and the legacy of its founder. By the early 2000s, the media landscape was changing rapidly. Consolidation was becoming the norm, with large corporations absorbing independent networks to expand their reach. Cable television was no longer just about niche channels. It was about scale, ownership, and global influence. BET, despite its success, was not immune to these pressures. Robert Johnson faced a decision that many founders eventually confronted: whether to continue growing independently or to sell the company he had spent decades building. The offer that would change everything came from Viacom, one of the largest media conglomerates in the world. It was a massive deal. Viacom proposed purchasing BET in a transaction worth billions, instantly transforming the network from a privately held Black-owned company into part of a global media empire. For Robert Johnson, the decision was not simple. On one hand, BET had reached heights few could have imagined when it first launched. It had become profitable, influential, and deeply embedded in American culture. Selling it meant giving up control of a legacy he helped create from the ground up. On the other hand, the deal represented an unprecedented financial milestone. It would make Robert Johnson the first Black billionaire in America, a historic achievement in itself, breaking barriers that had stood for generations. After careful consideration, negotiations moved forward. In 2001, BET was officially sold to Viacom in a landmark deal valued at approximately $3 billion. The sale instantly reshaped the media industry. Robert Johnson achieved billionaire status, securing his place in business history. But the transaction also sparked intense debate that continues to this day. For many observers, the sale represented success at the highest level. It was proof that a Black-owned media company could be built, scaled, and sold for billions in the global marketplace. For others, however, it raised difficult questions. What happens when ownership changes hands? What is gained and what is lost when a culturally significant platform transitions from Black ownership to a corporate conglomerate? These questions became central to BET's post-sale identity. After Viacom took control, BET continued to operate and expand. It remained a major platform for Black entertainment, launching new shows, producing award ceremonies, and maintaining a strong presence in music and culture. But many longtime viewers noticed changes. The tone of programming evolved, the leadership structure shifted, and the sense of cultural ownership that once defined BET felt different to some of its original audience. Meanwhile, Robert Johnson stepped away from the company he founded and began exploring new ventures in business, sports, and investment. His billionaire status brought new opportunities, but also placed his legacy under constant public scrutiny. Sheila Johnson, who had already moved on from BET years earlier, also continued building her own independent legacy in business, eventually becoming a respected figure in multiple industries, including sports ownership and hospitality. Together, their stories reflected two different paths emerging from the same origin point: a company built from vision, risk, and determination. The legacy of BET, however, remained complex. On one hand, it proved that Black-owned media could succeed at the highest level. It created opportunities, shifted representation, and gave millions of viewers a platform that reflected their culture. On the other hand, its sale marked the end of Black ownership of one of the most influential media networks in America. That duality is what makes the BET story so powerful and so debated. Even today, BET's influence can still be felt across entertainment. Many of the artists it helped elevate went on to become global icons. Many of the cultural moments it helped amplify remain part of American pop culture history. But the story of the Johnson family behind it is just as important as the network itself. Because BET was never just a business, it was a vision built by people who believed they could reshape media representation in America, even if it meant sacrificing personal comfort, enduring public scrutiny, and making decisions that would permanently change their lives. In the end, tragedy and triumph are intertwined. A groundbreaking empire was built, a historic sale was made, a family's legacy was forever written into media history. And the question that remains is the one viewers still ask today. Was the price of building BET worth what it ultimately cost? And that's the story of BET, the rise, the power, the family behind it, and the sacrifices that came with building a billion-dollar black media empire. From vision to victory, and from success to separation, it's a reminder that every legacy has a cost. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the most influential media stories ever, don't forget to like, subscribe to Black Status, and turn on notifications. And tell me in the comments, do you think the Johnson family made the right decision in the end?